I died on a Wednesday, and woke up on the Monday I first met the man who ruined me. My phone was vibrating against the nightstand, the tinny chime of my old alarm cutting through the early morning quiet. Old. That's the word that stuck. Because the phone in my hand wasn't the sleek rectangle I'd been using 5 minutes before the truck slammed into me. No, this was my old phone. The one with the tiny scratch on the corner, and the slightly dim screen. And the date staring back at me. Monday, April 2nd, 2018. I sat up so fast my vision swam. The air smelled like the cheap lavender-scented fabric softener I'd stopped buying years ago, and my knees brushed against the skirt of a dress I'd thrown out ages ago. A pale blue thing I'd worn exactly once, before realizing it made me look like a nervous receptionist in a mid-2000s rom-com. My hands were shaking, but I forced them still and turned my left wrist upward. Smooth skin. No faint white scar from the crash. I let out a sharp laugh, half disbelief, half relief? Terror? I wasn't sure. Okay. I whispered to the empty room. Okay, fine. We're doing this again. Only this time, I wasn't going to be afraid. The lobby of Rowe Global looked exactly as I remembered. Polished marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows letting in the kind of spring light that makes everything feel a little too clean, too open. People moved with that Monday morning combination of purpose and caffeine dependence. I recognized more than a few faces, some friendly, some that would stab you in the back if they thought there was a promotion inside. 5 years ago, I'd walked in hunched over, clutching my bag like it was body armor, and ordered what the cafe downstairs still had on file as my nervous latte. This morning, I straightened my spine, smoothed my skirt, and approached the same counter. The barista looked up, bright smile ready. Nervous latte? I gave her a half smile. Not today. Black coffee. Calm. Completely calm. She tilted her head, amused. That'll be a first. Upstairs, the hum of the executive floor wrapped around me like static. The elevator dinged open, and I stepped into the long glass corridor toward the CEO's corner office. My heart wasn't racing like it had last time. Well, maybe a little, but it wasn't panic. More anticipation. The man himself was leaning against his desk when I entered, flipping through a folder. Tall, dark suit perfectly cut, expression unreadable. Graham Rowe looked exactly as he had in my memory. A controlled storm in human form. His gaze landed on me, cool and assessing. New hire? Yes. I kept my tone steady. But I learned fast. A flicker of something. Curiosity? Crossed his face before disappearing under the ice. I'd never said that to him in our first meeting before. And then it hit. That strange metallic tang at the back of my tongue. The one I'd only ever felt in the moments when something shifted. The line of events was already bending. I wasn't the only one noticing. From the side, a man in a perfectly pressed gray suit, and the kind of expression that could slice through glass, gave me a slow, evaluating look. Sloan Park, senior assistant, corporate survivalist, and the unofficial keeper of Rowe Global's unwritten rules. He didn't smile, didn't introduce himself. Just took me in, head to toe, like I was a chess piece he hadn't decided the value of yet. Well, he said finally, voice dry as a martini. Let's see how long you last. By the time I left the office, my fingers were icy despite the warmth of the building. My voice, though, had stayed calm. My steps had stayed measured. In my first life, I'd been terrified from day one. This time, terror was a luxury I couldn't afford. This time, I was here to win. The assistant bullpen at Rowe Global was an open expanse of desks, screens, and whispered conversations that somehow carried across the entire floor. A giant glass board dominated one wall. Columns of names, color, coded deadlines, and cryptic post-it notes arranged with the precision of a military campaign. This, Sloan Park announced, stepping beside me with a thin binder under his arm, is the war board. Learn it, love it, never ever be caught on the wrong side of it. Up close, I could see the way his eyes flicked from one name to another, like a chess player surveying the board. Rule number 1, he continued, moving toward the desks with me trailing behind. Never promise anything on behalf of the boss unless you enjoy apologizing in your sleep. And here he tapped a desk belonging to a harried-looking woman on the phone, is where promises go to die. The woman shot him a look. He ignored it. Rule number 2, document everything, and I mean everything. Conversations, calls, hallway run-ins. If you can't prove it happened, it didn't. And if you can prove it happened, it's a weapon. Use it carefully. We stopped by a printer that was steadily spitting out a stream of pages. Sloane plucked one from the tray, scanned it, then handed it to me. Rule number 3, he said. Tell the truth in a way that ensures the wrong ears can't use it against you. Which usually means... He leaned in slightly, voice dropping. You tell it sideways. Think like a lawyer. Or a magician. I raised an eyebrow. You teaching me how to survive? Or how to manipulate? Yes. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. The tour lasted 20 minutes, and by the end I'd been introduced to the unspoken geography of the floor, the safe harbors, the ambush zones, the people whose calls you always take and the ones you never answer without backup. 5 years ago, all of this had taken me months to figure out. This time, I kept pace, asked the right questions, and didn't bother to hide the fact that I was cataloging everything. When Sloane finally stopped, he studied me for a long moment. You're either quick, or you're reckless, he said. Which is it? Why not both? That earned me a short, dry laugh. He reached into his binder and pulled out a gray envelope, the kind that looked like it should contain state secrets. Your survival kit, he said, handing it over. Templates for emails that will save your career, a cheat sheet for Graham's preferred phrasing and, his voice lowered, a private map of influence around here. Don't lose it. I don't give out second copies. I slid into my assigned desk just in time for my phone to buzz. From Graham Rowe. Subject, Vantine. The name alone made my stomach tighten. Vantine Industries, the glossy, too-perfect supplier with a knack for hiding dirt under gold plating. In my first life, the Vantine deal had been the start of everything unraveling. Evan Dorsey, the CFO, had found a way to funnel money through falsified shipping invoices, and I'd been the convenient scapegoat when it all went public. I opened the email. Need all materials for the Vantine presentation. Complete file. All cross-references. Noon. Gar. Just like that, the clock was ticking. The queasy knot in my stomach eased into something steadier. Not fear, focus. Confidence was a muscle, and I'd been training for this in my head for 5 years. I knew exactly where the cracks would be. Certificates filed in 2 different versions. Supplier audits missing a signature here, a date there. None of it obvious unless you already knew where to look. This time, I would be the one holding the evidence, not caught in it. An hour in, Sloane appeared at the edge of my desk, watching me type. You're moving like someone who knows the layout already, he said. Maybe I just read fast. He narrowed his eyes, but didn't push. Careful, Harlow. People here notice things they're not supposed to. I looked up, meeting his gaze without flinching. Let them notice. That got me another almost smile before he walked away. By noon, the Vantine folder was heavier than it had any right to be. Every cross-reference flagged, every document clean. On the top sat a single sticky note. Check certificate chain, shipment 14 billions. I knew Graham wouldn't ask how I'd spotted it. Not yet. But the moment he did, I'd be ready. With the truth told sideways, just like Sloane taught me. If the first day was a battlefield, then I'd just claimed my first patch of ground. The elevator to 42 hummed like a held breath. Luck, or fate, or the cruel sense of humor of the building's scheduling software, left me and Graham alone. Stainless steel walls, our reflections stacked in thin, repeating panels. My heart gave a single disloyal thump. I ignored it. He didn't look at me right away. He watched the floor numbers climb as if they were misbehaving. Then, evenly. You don't look lost. I kept my eyes on the doors. I had a good teacher. A pause. Who? Fear. The elevator caught in that tiny half-second before the next floor, a hiccup of gravity that made my stomach float. Graham's gaze slid to me, cool as a winter pane. Something flickered there. Assessment, curiosity, the faintest spark of amusement he'd deny under oath. Then the bell chimed, the doors parted, and the moment dissolved into fluorescent daylight. Onyx, he said, and strode out. I followed, palms steady, ears warm. Calm hands, hot ears. It felt like my body remembered both timelines, and couldn't decide which one to run with. Onyx was all glass and angles, a conference table like a runway, a wall-mounted screen, chairs that looked expensive enough to file expense reports of their own. Folders were stacked at each seat, left to right, as always, the way Evan Dorsey liked to orchestrate the narrative. Start with the rosy audit summary, then drift gently toward the footnotes where the rot was buried. Sloane was already there, arranging pens with military precision. He spared me a glance that said everything and nothing. "Place your bets," he murmured as I took my seat beside him. "Excuse me?" How many minutes the new hire lasts before Rose skims her like cream or Dorsey pegs her as a threat. He slid a sticky note toward me. 7 scribbled in neat block letters. "I'm feeling generous." "Bold of you to assume I'm cream," I said, monitoring the far door. "What if I'm buttermilk?" "Then you'll curdle the room," Sloane replied, perfectly straight-faced. Which, to be clear, would be a service. People began to stream in: legal, procurement, a pair of Vantine reps with bright smiles and colder eyes. Evan Dorsey arrived last. CFO charisma turned to low. He nodded at Graham, then let his gaze drift to me with polite disinterest. In my previous life, that look had felt like safety. This time, it felt like camouflage. As the greetings circled, I rose and crossed to the stack nearest the head of the table. A minor, invisible adjustment. I switched the first 2 folders, then slid the third to the top. From the corner of my eye I saw Sloane's eyebrow hitch by a millimeter. "What was that?" He breathed. "Spring cleaning," I murmured, returning to my seat. Graham took his place at the head, jaw set, cuffs immaculate. "Let's begin." Dorsey cleared his throat. "As discussed, we'll start with Vantine's external audit." "Actually," I said, gently enough not to bruise, "it may be cleaner to start with certificates of conformity for shipments 13 through 15. There's a chain of custody reference that informs the audit's scope. Silence is a temperamental animal. Sometimes it hides. Sometimes it pounces. This one did both." Graham's eyes cut to me, unreadable. Dorsey's smile cooled a few degrees. The Vantine reps exchanged a flicker-fast look. Sloane, beside me, wrote 5 over his original 7, then struck it out and replaced it with 10. "Proceed," Graham said, the single word sheathed in velvet. I opened the top folder, the one I'd elevated, and laid out the first page. "Here," I said, tapping the lower corner, "the signature for 14 billion certificate. It's valid, but the timestamp metadata in the PDF properties doesn't line up with the vendor's submission log. The discrepancy is small, 2 minutes off. But the audit references the submission log as authoritative, so if we don't reconcile the chain, the audit's conclusion, positive or negative, could be challenged." No one moved. Then one of the Vantine reps leaned forward, careful. "Our submission system batches certificates. Minor time drift is expected." "Of course," I said. "Which is why we should pull the batch hash from the archive, and compare it to the certificate's embedded digest." I flipped to the second page. Also, Shipment 13 certificate references an auditor login that was reassigned last quarter. The credentials match, the user doesn't. Dorsey laced his fingers together. "And, you noticed this? How?" "I read fast," I said, echoing myself from earlier. "And the war board hates mismatched timestamps." Across the table, Sloane coughed once into his fist. He'd definitely written something snide on his sticky note. "I'd ask later." Graham angled his head, not quite a nod. "We'll review both," he said. "For now, let's continue." Dorsey recalibrated effortlessly. He walked the room through the numbers, the projections, the projected projections. He was good. He always had been. But the script he'd honed on a dozen conference tables hit a snag each time I nudged from my chair, just enough to redirect the flow. "Before we finalize volume discounts," I cut in lightly at one point. "Can we confirm whether Vantine is seeking a most favored nation clause? It will impact our downstream pricing with the EU distributors." The Vantine lead blinked. "That request would come later." "It usually does," I agreed. "Which is why I'm asking now." Graham didn't look at me, but I felt the awareness like a line of heat across the table. My ears burned, my hands stayed precise. "Anchor, then act. When someone from procurement asked about shipping insurance thresholds, I already had the clause flagged. When legal wondered about data retention across borders, I had the draft addendum ready to reference. It wasn't magic. It was memory sharpened into intent. Too prepared. The thought crossed my mind, then passed on. Because the alternative had been a life where I was never prepared enough to stop the fall. Dorsey's attention kept circling back to me. Once, he caught my eye and held it a fraction too long, curiosity shading toward suspicion. I let the look slide off as if it were harmless. In this room, everything had an echo. I refused to be the one who rang hollow. By the midpoint, the rhythm of the meeting had changed, subtly but undeniably. Graham had stopped translating other people's points into decisions and started shaping the decision in real time. Fingers steepled, voice low, questions clean and precise. Every so often, his gaze would tick to me like a metronome. I timed my breathing to it. In, out, hands steady, ears on fire. Sloane leaned close during a lull. "You realize you're juggling knives?" "I brought band-aids," I whispered back. "I prefer sutures," he said. "Less wasteful." Near the end, as the Vantine team packaged their last slide in confidence and chrome, I slid one final folder toward Graham. "Shipment 15A," I said. "The certificate's watermark is correct, but the vector path differs from the template used in 13 and 14. Probably an output setting. Possibly not. Possibly fraud." I didn't say it. You don't shout fire in a glass room. You point at the smoke and let the right person name it. Graham's thumb pressed lightly into the page. The smallest trace of tension left his jaw. "We'll verify," he said, and moved us to closing points. When the meeting adjourned, chairs scraped, handshakes happened, and the Vantine reps left with controlled smiles. Dorsey lingered, then approached me and Sloane. "Impressive," he said, tone complimentary, eyes not. "For a first week? Day," I corrected pleasantly. "But I appreciate the promotion." He held my gaze a second longer than manners required, then shifted it to Sloane. "You're recruiting well." "I don't recruit," Sloane said. "I triage." Dorsey's smile thinned. He left without looking back. For a moment the room fell into that strange post-meeting quiet, the kind that feels like the echo of a wave after it breaks. I gathered the folders in the order I wanted them left, a breadcrumb trail for anyone who might retrace it. Graham was still at the head of the table. He hadn't moved. When I looked up, he was already watching me, consideration like a blade's edge. "You anticipated questions I hadn't asked yet," he said. I kept my voice level. "It's easier to answer the right ones if you hear them coming." He studied me, that unreadable almost expression on his face again. "You learn fast." "I had a good teacher," I said, "and this time I didn't have to explain who." The metallic tang slid across my tongue, faint and disappearing. The line was bending again. Sloane rose, smoothing his tie. "Told you she'd last 10, he said to no one and everyone, then added under his breath for me alone. "Collect your winnings at the war board." Outside, the elevator doors waited open, a stainless steel mouth, a memory, and a promise. I stepped in first. I didn't break. The server room smelled faintly of dust and cold air, an odd combination of overworked fans and paper files stored for backup purposes in case the digital world imploded. The overhead light hummed quietly, throwing a pale wash over rows of metal shelving. I slipped inside with my badge and shut the door, the noise of the office fading to a distant murmur. It was late enough that most people had gone home, and the hum of the servers felt like the only heartbeat left in the building. The Vantine folder sat on the top shelf where it always had, exactly where I remembered finding it years ago, back when the world was still pretending everything was fine. I pulled it down and spread the contents across the work table, lining up the specifications from 3 years ago against the current set. It didn't take long to see it. 2 certificates, supposedly from the same supplier and audit chain, bore subtly different formatting. Spacing shifts in the watermark, a missing microprint detail in the corner seal. Nothing the average compliance officer would catch unless they were looking for it. Nothing I would have noticed my first time around. The air tasted faintly metallic. A familiar warning hum in my blood. I traced the differences with the tip of my finger, committing every detail to memory. This was it. The first domino. The piece of evidence that had, in my first life, slipped through until it was too late. "Wow," a voice said from the doorway. "That's either impressive initiative or grounds for a very long compliance meeting." I didn't startle, at least not outwardly. Turning, I found Liam Ortega leaning against the doorframe, 2 coffee cups in hand. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked like every after-hours office cliché, except for the sharpness in his eyes. "Depends on who's asking," I said. He stepped inside, offering one of the cups. "Peace offering. It's black. Didn't think you looked like the caramel mocha type." "Accurate," I said, accepting it. The coffee was hot, the warmth seeping into my hands. Liam glanced at the spread of papers. "So, what's the new girl doing in the archives at?" He checked his watch. 8:23 on a Monday? "Catching up," I said lightly. "I read fast." He tilted his head. "That's not catching up. That's forensic-level document review. And you're cross-referencing Vantine?" I sipped a coffee to buy a second. "You're very observant." "Hazard of the job?" He leaned on the table, scanning the certificates. "You know most people just take the PDFs at face value, right? Most people also don't find surprises when they do." His mouth curved, half amusement, half intrigue. "And you? You like surprises?" "Not this kind." We stood there a moment, the quiet wrapping around us. There was an ease to him I hadn't expected, warmth where Graham was all sharp edges. The kind of person who could make you forget the clock ticking over your head. Which, of course, was dangerous in its own way. "I should let you get back to it," he said finally. "But, whatever you're looking for, be careful. People get touchy when you dig too deep." I met his gaze over the table. "Then maybe they shouldn't bury things." A beat passed, long enough for something unspoken to settle between us, before he straightened and headed for the door. When he was gone, I turned back to the work table. One by one, I scanned the questionable certificates and tagged the files in the internal system. I didn't leave a trail of red flags, just a clean, innocuous note in the database. Recommend full verification of certificate chain for shipments 13 to 15 due to minor metadata inconsistencies. Enough to nudge someone in compliance to start looking. Not enough to scream that I'd been here. As I hit save, the faint metallic tang in my mouth thinned, then disappeared entirely. It was gone. The line of events had shifted, and this time, it wasn't snapping back. I gathered the papers, slid the folder back onto its shelf, and left the server room as quietly as I'd come. The office beyond was almost silent, just the distant hum of elevators, and the muted glow of the city through the windows. The future felt different, lighter. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. The plane to Zurich was the kind of sleek corporate shuttle that tried to pretend it wasn't just a very expensive metal tube. Wide leather seats, low hum of the engines, endless white light that made time feel like a concept someone else invented. I sat across the aisle from Graham and Sloane, my laptop open but mostly ignored as I watched clouds smear across the window. Graham was scrolling through a document like he was willing it to rearrange itself. Sloane, on the other hand, was balancing a coffee cup on the armrest with the precision of a bomb technician. "Do you know," Sloane said conversationally, "that the average CEO's diet consists of coffee, spreadsheets, and a vague sense of guilt?" Graham didn't look up. "I don't feel guilt." "Then you're not average. Congratulations." Sloane took a long sip. "You should write a book. How to Survive on Caffeine and KPIs." I smothered a smile. "Sounds like a bestseller." Sloane gave me a sly look. Chapter 1. Skip breakfast, dominate the market. Chapter 2. Lunch is for the weak. Chapter 3, I offered. Learn to absorb nutrients through glaring. That's a skill. Sloane agreed. He's practically photosynthetic. Graham's eyes flicked to me for exactly 1 second before returning to his screen. It wasn't approval, but it also wasn't disapproval. Progress. Zurich in early spring was all glass and clean air. The mountains in the distance like postcards no one had touched. The hotel lobby smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive I couldn't name. We had an hour before the meeting, which Graham used to disappear into his room without a word. Sloane and I reviewed the agenda over coffee in the lounge, his tone still threaded with dry humor but sharper now, like a knife he'd decided to polish. By the time we walked into the partners' conference room, I'd already mapped the seating chart, the order of presentations, and the faces I didn't recognize. Glass walls on two sides looked out over the city, the light so bright it almost made the table itself glow. The European partners spoke in smooth, confident rhythms, their slides a parade of numbers and projections. Graham listened in that way he had, still, almost impassive, but with the faint tension of someone who could dismantle your argument without raising his voice. Halfway through, a detail on one of the slides caught my eye, a cost assumption labeled in euros, but calculated with an outdated exchange rate. It was subtle, the kind of mistake that could shift margins just enough to create leverage later. I leaned slightly toward Graham, keeping my voice low. Slide 8, exchange rates pre-January. That's a 4% swing. His eyes didn't move, but a heartbeat later, he interrupted the presenter with a question so precise it made the room pause. The partner corrected the number, flipping back through their notes. Graham nodded once, the matter closed. And then, so quietly I almost thought I'd imagined it, he said, "Thank you." Not the clipped, transactional thanks you give to a waiter. Not a default courtesy. It was low, deliberate, and so rare it sent a rush of warmth to my face and a tremor down my knees. I managed to keep my posture neutral, but inside I felt the shift. Something unfreezing between us. The meeting stretched into late afternoon. By the time we wrapped, the city had started to glow under the setting sun, all reflections and clean lines. I found the hotel bar mostly empty, except for a man leaning at the far end, nursing a glass of something amber. Liam Ortega turned at the sound of my steps, his mouth curving in that half-smile that was equal parts charm and challenge. "Didn't think I'd see you here," I said, sliding onto the stool beside him. "I'm full of surprises," he replied. "Corporate sent me along for background support." I lifted a brow. "Vague." He shrugged. "Keeps things interesting." Then, after a sip, "You made quite the impression in there today." Rowe doesn't say thank you, unless he means it. Something in his tone made my pulse tighten. "You were watching?" "Always," he said. Then, quieter, "And I have my own sources on Vantine. Let's just say, I knew about certain issues, but pushing too soon would have jeopardized the deal." There it was, the truth in a shade of gray. Not malice, not exactly loyalty either. "So you stayed quiet," I said. "I stayed strategic." He met my gaze. Sometimes they're the same thing. The warmth from Graham's thank you, tangled with a flicker of guilt. Because part of me understood Liam's choice, and part of me hated it. He finished his drink and set the glass down gently. "Careful, Emma. In this game, everyone thinks they're the one holding the cards. And you?" I asked. He smiled without answering, then slipped off his stool and left me with the echo of his words. The bar was quiet again, just the soft clink of glassware and the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. I sat there, knees still unsteady, caught between the sharp edges of Graham's rare gratitude and the smooth charm of Liam's moral calculus. Two different kinds of dangerous. And I had no intention of choosing blindly this time. The hotel lobby was almost empty at night, all high ceilings and echoing marble softened by low amber light. Outside, Zurich's streets glowed under street lamps, the glass doors reflecting the city back at itself. I tucked myself into one of the deep chairs by the window, earbuds in, phone in hand. The dial tone barely finished before Lila's voice burst through. "Emma? It's like midnight there, isn't it? What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said, smiling despite the day's wait. "I just wanted to hear you." There was a pause, then a soft laugh. "Wow. You're calling me for no reason. That's new." "Yeah," I admitted. "I'm working on being a better sister." "Oh God, is this about that self-help podcast I sent you?" I grinned. "No. It's about, well, let's just say I got a restart." She snorted. "What, like a video game?" "Sort of. Only without the tutorial, the cheat codes, or the save points." "So you're on hardcore mode," she said, mock sympathy dripping from her tone. "That explains why you sound like someone who just fought 3 dragons and a tax audit." I laughed, leaning back. Something like that. My voice softened. Lila, last time. I got too busy, too caught up in work and everything else. I missed your shows, your birthdays, all the things I said I'd come to. I don't want that again. The line went quiet, except for the faint rustle of her breath. Okay, she said finally. But you have to mean it. I don't do well with people promising and disappearing. I mean it, I said. When's your next exhibit? 3 weeks. I'll send you the invite. Send me too. I'm bringing someone. Ooh, someone? She teased. Is this about that boss you never shut up about before? I closed my eyes, smiling wryly. It's complicated. Then I'll make sure the wine table is extra stocked, she said. We stayed on the line for another 10 minutes, trading small jokes and comfortable silences. By the time we hung up, I felt lighter, like the conversation had loosened something I hadn't even noticed was tight. The elevator bank was quiet when I rounded the corner back toward my room. My heels clicked against the polished floor, the sound a little too loud in the stillness. That's when I saw them. Through the glass partition of the far conference room, Liam stood with Evan Dorsey. The room lights were dim, but their silhouettes were clear, their heads tilted close in conversation. Liam's posture was easy, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing slightly as he spoke. Dorsey's was the kind of stillness that came from listening with intent. The glass between us caught the light from the lobby, throwing my reflection over theirs. For a moment I saw myself standing with them, like some layered photograph where past, present, and future didn't quite align. 2 versions of me. One that had trusted the wrong people. One that had learned not to. I stepped closer, but the conversation was silent through the barrier. Liam laughed at something Dorsey said, the sound only visible in the curve of his mouth. It was too familiar, too comfortable. I told myself there could be 100 explanations. Strategic alliances, professional courtesy, a passing conversation in a shared project. And yet the image of the 2 of them, framed in glass and my ghosted reflection, felt like a warning I'd seen before. When Liam glanced toward the door, I stepped back into the shadow by the elevator, letting the reflection swallow me. He didn't see me. Or if he did, he didn't let it show. The metallic tang didn't come this time. No sudden shift in the timeline. Just the quiet certainty that not every choice I'd made in this second chance would be simple. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped inside, the mirrored walls throwing my face back at me from every angle. Hardcore mode, I murmured to my reflection, and pressed the button for my floor. The big conference room at HQ had the acoustics of a cathedral and the warmth of a morgue. Glass walls, long table. The city a gray ribbon outside. A dozen people had already taken their seats, legal with their neat stacks, procurement tapping pens, compliance looking both righteous and exhausted. Evan Dorsey sat near the head, posture primed to guide a narrative. Graham took the chair at the top, silent, still. Eyes narrowed in that way that made the air thinner. Folders waited in front of each seat. Screens glowed. The Vantine logo hung on the main display, like a polished badge that had never seen rain. I could feel a faint tremor in my fingers as I organized my notes. Not panic. The body remembering another timeline where this room had eaten me alive. I pressed my palms flat to the table. Calm hands, I told myself. Calm hands, hot ears. Anchor, then act. Dorsey opened smoothly. As you know, certain inconsistencies have been flagged in the Vantine documentation. His gaze drifted over the room, catching on people like hooks. Preliminary review suggests these may have resulted from errors introduced at the assistant level. File tags, ordering, timestamp conversions. Given the onboarding period, we should expect a learning curve. There it was. The genteel throat clearing before he dropped the blame. In my first life, this had been the part where my mouth went dry and I couldn't find my voice. In this one, my voice found me first. If we're assigning causes, I said evenly, we should separate inputs from outcomes. Heads turned. Sloan, 2 seats down, didn't look at me, but I saw the corner of his mouth tense, a silent steady. Graham's gaze touched me for a heartbeat, then returned to Dorsey. Proceed. Miss Harlow. I clicked my laptop to the screen. The display shifted to a clean timeline, dates, file versions, message IDs. Not flashy. Surgical. 3 buckets, I said. Certificate metadata, audit credential continuity, and exchange rate assumptions. For each we have a chain of custody. I tapped the first dot. Shipment 13 certificate, uploaded 9/42/13, UTC PDF properties show a creation timestamp of 9/40/11. 2-minute discrepancy. Normal if batch processing, unless the batch hash doesn't match. I advanced to a side panel. It doesn't match. The archive hash for the 942 batch resolves to 4 files. Shipment 13 feeds certificate, as stored, carries a distinct digest from that batch. That means the submitted document was re-exported post-queue. I felt the old phantom of fear try to rise. Don't say it, you'll be the one they burn. And watched it pass like fog on a warm car hood. Second bucket, I continued, audit credential continuity. The auditor login referenced in shipment 13 belongs to a user reassigned last quarter. The login is valid, the human isn't. 2 signatures, 1 account. That's not a training issue. That's intent. Legal shifted. A low murmur. Someone coughed. Dorsey's voice stayed smooth. And your source for these inferences? Logs, I said, and clicked open the protocol, internal messages with timestamps, system events, the one-line note I'd left in the database days ago. Recommend full verification of certificate chain. I let the evidence speak. The room listened. Third bucket, I said. Exchange rate assumptions in the European models pre-January. A 4% swing against current numbers. Vantine's slide deck used the old rate. Our own preliminary margin doc, drafted internally, mirrored it. I paused. Mirroring is a reflex when people are rushing. It's also an excellent place to hide a leak. Silence pooled, difficult and dense. I felt heat in my ears. My hands were steady. I looked to Graham. He wasn't blinking. He was absorbing. Dorsey folded his hands, patient. Miss Harlow, he said, you've been here. He checked the agenda, as if it contained my life. What, 3 weeks? I met his eyes. Day 8. A remarkable level of confidence for someone in their first month, he said. A gentler man might have smiled when he said it. Evan didn't need to. Vigilance isn't a job title, I replied. It's a habit. His tone cooled a degree. Where did you learn to audit like this? Attention to detail is a kind of experience, I said. Sometimes it's the only kind that counts. A faint laugh. Someone stifled it badly. Sloane's pen made a single decisive stroke on his notes. Graham's thumb pressed once against the table's edge and released. Dorsey leaned back, composed. Let's not turn this into a witch hunt. Assistants touch files. Errors happen. Which is why we'll treat this as a system problem, not a scapegoat hunt, Graham said, voice low and definite. He didn't raise it. Didn't need to. It spread through the room like a pressure change. Independent audit, external full scope, chain of custody, credential logs, version diffs, financial model assumptions. Compliance, coordinate with legal on engagement parameters. Compliance nodded with visible relief. Legal began drafting with the speed of people who'd been waiting for permission. Dorsey inclined his head, agreeable. Of course. Transparency serves us all. On the screen, the timeline glowed with its simple bones. Events, not excuses. My palms tingled, not cold. Warm, the way skin feels after stepping into sunlight. The rest of the meeting moved with an odd, quiet efficiency, as if everyone had been holding their breath and only just remembered how to exhale. When we adjourned, chairs scraped, laptops clicked shut, murmurs rose. People filed out in rivulets. I packed my things slowly, giving my body the time it needed to realize we had not been shot out of the sky. When I looked up, Graham was standing by the door, watching the room empty with that measured stillness of his. He caught my eye and tilted his head toward the hallway. The corridor outside was quieter than the room had been. Carpet swallowed footsteps, and the city pressed its light against the glass in long rectangles. He didn't start with a compliment. He wouldn't. He started with a question. Why weren't you afraid? I didn't have to reach for the answer. I tried being afraid, I said. It didn't help. Something shifted in his face, just enough to register if you knew what baseline looked like. The line of his mouth loosened, the focus in his eyes warming by a single degree. "Good," he said softly. Then, almost, a smile. Not in his eyes, not fully, but the echo of one. "Keep not being afraid." A laugh slid out of me, surprised and quiet. Heat moved over my arms like the afterglow of stepping from shade to sun. My hands, so often ice in these hallways, felt normal, my fingers flexible, strong. "Independent audit will make enemies," I said. "Probably some I can't see yet." "Enemies are a lagging indicator," he replied. "We deal with them after the work." He turned to go, then paused. "Your protocol was clean," he added. "Hard to ignore." "Sideways truth," I said. "I had a good teacher." "Fear?" He didn't quite tease, but the edges softened. "And a couple of decent coaches," I said, thinking of Sloane's rules, of Lila's voice in my ear like a rope tossed across a gap. He nodded once, a seal on the moment, and headed down the corridor toward the glass that passed for sky on this floor. I stood there a beat longer, letting the warmth sink in, letting my body clock a new memory of this place, not as a room that broke me, but as one where I changed the sound the ice made when it cracked. The HQ cafeteria was doing its usual late-morning shuffle, half-empty tables, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clatter of trays from the kitchen. I was halfway through a mug of coffee that was pretending not to be burnt, when Liam slid into the seat across from me. He didn't bother with small talk. "I heard about the audit," he said, low enough that only I could hear. I met his gaze. "Of course you did." His smile was faint, tight. "Emma, I didn't tell Dorsey anything about you. I need you to know that. That's a low bar." He leaned in, elbows on the table. I was trying to stop something worse, from the inside. If I'd pushed too hard on Vantine earlier, we could have lost the deal entirely, and half the people in our department would be updating their resumes right now. There was no guile in his voice. No smirk. He believed what he was saying. Maybe even more importantly, he wanted me to believe it. "I do care about you," he added, softer now. "But I can't pretend I don't care about my career too. It's not either or for me." And there it was, the truth without sugar. He loved me. Or at least something about me. But he loved the climb as well. I didn't fault him for admitting it. I just didn't know if I could live in the space between. I nodded once, letting the words settle. "Thanks for telling me." He exhaled, like he'd been holding it in for too long. Then he gave me that careful smile again. The one meant to close a conversation without leaving it cold. And left. That evening, I took the train across the city to the old quarter, where Lila's gallery shared a block with a bakery and a shop that smelled like every spice in the world. Inside, the air was warm and rich with cinnamon from the cafe next door. Jazz drifted through the open double doors, soft enough not to fight the sound of voices. Lila spotted me immediately and waved, her curls bouncing. "You're early," she said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like turpentine and sugar. "Trying to change my reputation," I said. She grinned. "Careful, I might get used to it." Her latest series lined the walls, pieces full of sharp light and shadow, every color layered like memory. I wandered with a paper cup of chai in my hands, letting the warmth sink into my fingers. "Emma," Lila called from the front. "Someone left a folder here. I think it's Sloane?" Sure enough, the man himself appeared in the doorway, unruffled and holding an empty cup. "Terrible thing, forgetting a folder," he said. "Had to come all the way back." Behind him, another figure stepped in, tall and deliberate. "Graham." I blinked. "Did you come for the folder too?" Sloane's face was pure innocence. "He was in the car." Graham gave me a look that said, "Don't bother questioning it," and turned his attention to the walls. The sight of him in this space was strange. No glass conference tables, no strategic documents, just oil and canvas and the smell of cinnamon. He moved slowly, his eyes fixed on each piece like he was trying to memorize it. Lila sidled up to me, her voice pitched low. "Is that your boss?" "Yes," I said. "He's intense. You have no idea." She grinned and strolled over to Graham, undeterred by whatever force field usually kept people 2 steps back. "Do you like them?" she asked. He paused at a piece of hers that glowed with deep reds and shadow. "I don't know how to answer that. It's not a trick question, she said. I don't know how to rest, he admitted, still looking at the painting, or look at something without thinking about what it's worth. Lila tilted her head. That's fine. We'll teach you. It was such a simple sentence, tossed out like she'd just offered to show him where the extra spoons were kept. But something in his posture shifted, barely, but enough. I watched him stay in front of that painting, longer than he ever stayed still in a meeting. No phone in hand, no agenda to drive. Just looking. Sloane eventually wandered over, reclaiming his forgotten folder with the satisfaction of someone who'd orchestrated the whole thing. I think the art agrees with him, he said to me, sotto voce. I didn't answer. I was too busy watching Graham in the soft light, seeing him without the armor, and wondering if this was what Lila meant about teaching someone to rest. For the first time, I thought maybe it was possible. Graham's office felt different at night. The city outside was a wash of muted lights, a softened reflection in the wall of glass behind his desk. The air was too warm. The building's ancient HVAC system always overcompensated after sundown, and the low hum of it was the only sound when I stepped inside. He didn't look up right away, just finished the sentence he was writing before setting his pen aside. Close the door. I did, the click of it echoing in the concrete and glass quiet. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned back, eyes on me. But not with his usual razor focus. This was different. I wasn't always like this, he said. Like what? Suspicious, controlled, selective about who gets near. He turned his gaze toward the city. The first company I ever built, I had a partner. We were friends for a decade, I thought. Unbreakable. His jaw flexed once, a small tick. He stole the product. And the woman I loved, in the same week. There's an efficiency to betrayal, apparently. I stayed quiet. I learned then that you don't hand anyone the keys. Not to your business. Not to your life. He looked back at me. It's slower this way. But you survive. There was no dramatics in his voice, no bitterness coating the words. Just a fact, worn smooth by repetition. I sat down opposite him, resting my hands on the edge of the desk. I get that. More than you think. His brow arched slightly. I can't explain it without sounding strange, I said. But let's just say I've had a second chance. Not the clean start-over kind, more like, I've already seen what happens if I let fear make my choices. This time I'm choosing differently. Differently how? I'm not letting the wrong people get to decide who I am. I smiled faintly. Even if it means I lose more battles in the short term. He studied me like I'd just laid out a map in a language he almost understood. Then, unexpectedly, he reached for a folder on his desk and slid it across to me. What's this? I asked. Your promotion. My fingers stilled on the folder. Is this a reward? It's recognition, he said. You're not an errand runner, you think like a partner, and you act like you know what you're worth. That's useful. More than useful, it's rare. The warmth that spread through me was dangerous, because it wasn't just pride, it was the way his voice softened on the last word. Thank you, I said, meaning it. He didn't look away. Don't thank me for something you've earned. The air between us shifted, slower, heavier. The kind of pause that feels like leaning over the edge of something. My pulse kept time in my throat. He stood, coming around the desk until he was close enough that the heat of the overworked air system felt like it was coming from him instead. His gaze flicked to my mouth, then back to my eyes, and the world seemed to contract to the space between us. It would have happened, should have happened, if the door hadn't swung open. Forgive me, Sloane said, entirely unbothered. I just came in to breathe your air. I stepped back so fast I nearly bumped into the desk. Graham exhaled through his nose, somewhere between irritation and resignation. Was there a reason? He asked. Not a good one, Sloane said, retrieving a stray pen from the side table as if that had been the plan all along. Carry on. He left without closing the door, the hum of the hallway bleeding in. When I glanced back at Graham, he was shaking his head, a faint, unwilling curve at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough that it made my chest feel unreasonably warm. Rain check, he said quietly. I nodded. still catching my breath. Try not to schedule Sloane for it. I make no promises. The city light caught on the edges of his profile as I turned to leave, and for the first time, I wondered if my second chance wasn't just about me. The company's main assembly hall was unusually quiet for the number of people in it. The independent audit had taken weeks, and now the results sat on the long presentation screen like a verdict. The scheme was laid bare in bullet points and clean, damning language. Falsified certificates, altered timestamps, exchange rate manipulations, a tidy web of fraud that had finally snapped under the weight of its own threads. Evan Dorsey kept his composure, though his resignation was already inked and dated. Liam was there too, seated off to the side, his expression unreadable. The audit summary made it clear he'd given testimony, turned over documents, and named names. It had saved several people and operations from layoffs. It had also saved him from the kind of fallout that leaves a crater. When the meeting adjourned, I caught him in the hallway. "This isn't goodbye forever," Liam said, leaning against the wall. I smiled, but it was a soft, final kind of smile. "No, but it is goodbye for now." He searched my face, maybe for bitterness. There wasn't any. "I hope he deserves you." I didn't answer that. We both knew the only person who could decide that was me. In the next meeting, the one with department heads and too much coffee, Graham stood at the front of the room, hands braced on the table. He worked through the formalities, thanks to the audit team, notes on structural changes, reminders about compliance procedures. Then, in the same even tone, he said, "Special thanks to Emma Harlow for her precision in identifying the irregularities. Without it, the timeline for discovery would have been much longer." It wasn't flowery. It didn't need to be. The public acknowledgement hit me harder than I expected. Afterward, in the empty stretch of hallway outside the executive floor, he fell into step beside me. "I'm not a monster," he said, without preamble. I glanced at him. "I didn't say you were. You thought it once." "Maybe," I admitted. He stopped walking. "I'm an afraid man who pretended to be a stone wall long enough that it stuck. That's not the same thing as being invulnerable." The confession landed in the quiet like a stone into still water. I saw the echo of it in his posture, in the way his shoulders didn't draw up even as he said it. "I know," I said. "And I don't need you to be invulnerable. I just need you to be honest." His mouth tightened, then eased. "Come with me." The roof of HQ was technically a helipad, though I'd never seen a helicopter land here. The sun was lowering toward the horizon, the sky streaked in orange and gold, the city stretching out in every direction. A light wind tangled my hair. We stood near the edge, looking over the city. For once, neither of us was in a rush. "If we're going to do this," he said, "we should set the rules now." I raised a brow. "Rules?" "Honesty," he said first. "Even when it's ugly?" "Space," I countered. "So we don't get tired of each other before we start." "Mutual support," he added. I thought for a moment, then smiled. "And one more rule." He turned to me, the sunset catching in his eyes. "I'm listening. I'm still going to argue with you in meetings." For a second, I thought he'd push back. Instead, he gave a short, quiet laugh. "Good. Someone has to protect me from myself." Something in my chest loosened at that. Not just the humor, but the acceptance behind it. The kiss wasn't rushed, wasn't dramatic. It was the kind you remember because it felt like the start of something you'd been building toward without even noticing. His hand found mine, steady and warm. The hum of the city below us sounded less like noise and more like a song we hadn't heard before. When we finally pulled back, the light had shifted, the gold deepening into amber. "Second chances," I said quietly. He nodded. "Worth taking." And for the first time in either of my lives, I believed him.